A demonstrative strike. Is Russia preparing to detonate a nuclear bomb? The new year has just begun, and the information space is already flooded with reports about nuclear risks. Only 3 days have passed since the start of the new year, and there are already enough news and analytical articles about the possible use of nuclear weapons to last for months ahead. It seems that Russia has decided not to deviate from last year's practice and is once again using the topic of nuclear weapons as one of the key arguments in its military and political rhetoric. This time, Western journalists and analysts are increasingly writing that Vladimir Putin may resort to nuclear blackmail if he considers his position to be critical. This is not only about the war against Ukraine. Analytical materials also mention so-called demonstrative strikes, including the possible detonation of a nuclear device at high altitude over the Baltic or Black Sea. According to experts, the goal of such actions may not be a direct military effect, but rather to intimidate Western countries and demonstrate readiness for further escalation. So friends, let's sort all of this out together. My name is Anastasiia Husarieva. As usual, I kindly ask you to like this video and subscribe to our channel. In this video, we will break down what's happening with the nuclear doctrine around the world and what signals the key players are sending. So let's get started. The risk of nuclear escalation in Russia's war against Ukraine remains high. This was reported on December 28th by the Neue Zürcher Zeitung, citing analysts who closely monitor changes in the Kremlin's rhetoric and actions. According to their assessments, the likelihood of using the nuclear factor is directly linked to how Vladimir Putin perceives his own position and the prospects of the war. Experts emphasize that, for now, the Kremlin is trying to achieve its goals mainly through negotiation signals and political pressure. Therefore, nuclear threats have temporarily receded into the background. However, this does not mean that the topic has disappeared. In the event of a front collapse or a sharp shift in the balance of power, such as the supply of long-range missiles to Ukraine or direct intervention by Western troops, Putin may once again resort to using nuclear weapons as a tool of pressure. In such scenarios, as noted in the article, nuclear blackmail may become part of a broader coercion strategy. According to analysts, as long as Russia does not feel an imminent defeat, nuclear weapons primarily serve a deterrent function. It is used as a political and psychological factor intended to deter opponents and limit their actions. However, if the Kremlin finds itself in a strategic dead end and sees no way out of the situation, the risk of nuclear escalation in Europe increases significantly. The context of these assessments is complemented by the events of recent months. In October, the Russian General Staff reported conducting tests of the nuclear cruise missile Burevestnik, known in NATO classification as Skyfall and unofficially dubbed the Flying Chernobyl. The media noted that Moscow had intensified its nuclear intimidation of the West amid a simulation of readiness for peace negotiations regarding the war it started against Ukraine. These reports provoked a reaction outside of Russia. Commenting on the information about the tests, White House head Donald Trump stated that an American nuclear submarine was near the Russian coast. He emphasized, "They are not playing games with us. We are not playing games with them either." In addition, Trump ordered the Pentagon to begin nuclear tests on equal terms in response to the actions of other countries. After that, the Kremlin stated that the tests of the Burevestnik and the underwater nuclear drone Poseidon allegedly cannot be interpreted as actual nuclear tests. On October 21st, Vladimir Putin stated that a NATO ship had allegedly observed the tests of the Burevestnik nuclear missile. And already on November 5th, he held a meeting at which the head of the Russian Ministry of Defense, Andrei Belousov, reported that during exercises, the United States was practicing a preemptive nuclear strike against Russia. Belousov proposed to immediately begin preparations for full-scale nuclear tests by Russia, which became yet another alarming signal for the entire international community. Back in August of 2025, analytical publications specifically noted that Vladimir Putin might be much more prepared to use nuclear weapons than many Western experts had previously assumed. According to these assessments, an additional danger lies in the sensitivity of the American nuclear strategy to public provocations, which the Kremlin could exploit. This was written about, in particular, by British politician Bob Seeley in his column for The Telegraph. He recalled that US President Donald Trump ordered 2 nuclear submarines to be moved closer to the Russian coast in response to aggressive public statements by Russian Security Council Deputy Chairman Dmitry Medvedev. In his column, Seeley notes that many Russians view Medvedev as a figure who acts as the Kremlin's aggressive mouthpiece, whose harsh statements serve as a tool for intimidation and information pressure. According to Seeley, Russia has traditionally used nuclear threats as an element of its information strategy, and to some extent, this tactic works. He believes that the caution shown by the US and European Union countries after Russia's invasion of Ukraine in 2022 was largely driven by fear of escalation. At the same time, the politician emphasizes that the risk of a nuclear strike from Putin remains low, but it is not zero. The Kremlin has already demonstrated its willingness to take drastic measures in situations where it failed to achieve its strategic goals, as was the case in 2014 and 2022. The changes in the military doctrine of the Russian Federation deserve special attention. While in 2014 it only allowed for the use of nuclear weapons in response to a nuclear attack, the 2020 version introduced new provisions permitting a strike in the event of an imminent attack. In 2024, the threshold was lowered even further. Even conventional missile attacks can now be considered grounds for a nuclear response. According to experts, these changes broaden the scope for interpretation and increase the level of uncertainty. At the same time, Seeley points out that after the Ukrainian military's web operation, which resulted in the destruction of a significant number of Russian strategic bombers, Russia refrained from carrying out a nuclear strike. In his view, this confirms that nuclear threats are often a tool of psychological warfare, although the risk of their actual use never disappears completely. In his column, he also criticizes the policy of appeasement, stating that Putin has managed to take advantage of the West's caution. Back in September, analysts noted that Vladimir Putin was testing the reaction of Western countries to the presence of Russian weapons over foreign territories. And the behavior of the Kremlin leader, according to these same assessments, indicates a desire to understand the limits of what is permissible and NATO's response to such provocations. This was written about by analyst Rebecca Koffler in a publication for The Telegraph. She noted that one of Moscow's goals is to reduce the sensitivity of European society and politicians to such incidents. As examples, the overflights of aircraft over Estonia, the appearance of drones over Romania and Poland, as well as Putin's participation in the West 2025 maneuvers in military uniform, were mentioned. According to Koffler, such signals are not accidental and should be seen as part of a broader strategy. In the article, Putin keeps his finger on the nuclear trigger. In the article, The Risk of an Accident is Enormous, the analyst lists a number of signs that, in her opinion, point to the very same nuclear risk increasing. And she pays special attention to the West 2025 exercises, during which a nuclear strike was simulated. Koffler explains that Putin's participation in such activities may be aimed at psychologically preparing him to make such decisions. As an analogy, she cites information about the training of the General Secretary of the USSR, Leonid Brezhnev, who, according to recollections, had a trembling finger in similar situations. At the same time, Koffler emphasizes that this does not mean Putin is seeking nuclear war. According to her, the Russian leader does not want a global conflict. However, both he and the General Staff of the Russian Federation view nuclear weapons not only as a means of psychological pressure, but also as a real combat capability that can be used if necessary. Analysts believe that a particular threat is posed by the lack of a full-fledged dialogue between Russia and the United States on nuclear security issues. The parties hardly exchange the information necessary to reduce risks, while Moscow continues to prepare its troops for a potential nuclear confrontation. Small warheads are being developed, exercises are being conducted, and the forces were already put on combat alert on February 27, 2022. Against this backdrop, Western statements about the intention to defeat Russia and remove Putin, according to a number of analysts, may be perceived in the Kremlin as an additional threat, which heightens fears and pushes toward escalation. As noted in the publications, there is currently no trust between NATO and Russia. The alliance fears a possible Russian attack on one of its member states, which would automatically trigger Article 5 on collective defense, especially in the event of Ukraine's fall. In this context, analysts also mention historical parallels, in particular the incident from the Cold War era related to the NATO exercise Able Archer 83. At that time, due to the fog of war and the misinterpretation of the adversary's intentions, the USSR seriously considered the possibility of pressing that very red button. It is emphasized that interpreting signals in the context of conflict is always complicated. Not every order can be intercepted, and not every intelligence indicator can be correctly assessed. Mistakes and miscalculations in such an environment remain a very real threat that must be taken into account. Analysts agree that the risk of escalation persists, even if it is not inevitable. In the absence of trust, with constant provocations and changes in doctrines, the likelihood of mistakes and misinterpretations continues to be a serious concern. That's all we have time to tell you for today. Please like, subscribe, and we'll see you in the next broadcasts. My name is Anastasiia Husarieva. Take care of yourselves and wash your hands with soap. Bye bye, everyone.